What if I told you that during the deadliest war in human history, a nation smaller than most city parks quietly became a hub of spies, coded messages, and secret missions? Vatican City, a state with no army, no tanks, fought its own silent war against Hitler's darkness. Before we dive into this forgotten chapter of World War II, take a moment to support stories that rarely get told. Subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with someone who loves history. Because today, we're uncovering the Vatican's hidden war, one that changed countless lives. When we think of World War II, we imagine massive armies, blitzkrieg attacks, and entire nations mobilizing for survival. Yet in the heart of Rome, inside walls barely half a square kilometer wide, lived the Vatican, the smallest independent state in the world. By 1939, Pope Pius XII had just ascended to the papacy. Europe was collapsing into conflict. Hitler had invaded Poland, and Mussolini's fascist regime surrounded Vatican territory. Unlike other nations, the Vatican had no military divisions, no navy, no air force. But what it did have was influence, through its network of bishops, priests, and missionaries scattered across the globe. The Vatican maintained one of the most extensive communication webs in existence. These men and women were not soldiers, but their access to information made them invaluable, and in a time when every whisper mattered, the Vatican's whispers carried weight. Officially, Vatican City was neutral. Pope Pius XII insisted on being above politics, a shepherd to all Catholics, whether they lived under Hitler, Mussolini, Churchill, or Roosevelt. But neutrality was not the same as silence. Every sermon, every papal letter, every carefully chosen word broadcast on Vatican radio was scrutinized. To the Nazis, Pius XIV was the mouth of the Allies. To the Allies, he was frustratingly cautious. And to ordinary Catholics, especially the persecuted Jews, he was often their last hope. Neutrality gave the Vatican one advantage: it could move behind the lines. Diplomats, priests, and nuns could travel where spies could not. Letters carried under the guise of church. Correspondence often contained secret intelligence. Even in concentration camps, priests smuggled messages through hidden rosary beads, coded hymns, or Latin prayers that doubled as signals. It may sound like a thriller novel, but during the war, many members of the clergy doubled as informants. Father Robert Lieber, a close advisor to Pius XII, maintained discreet contact with German officers of conscience who opposed Hitler. Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty, an Irish priest stationed in the Vatican, organized one of the largest escape networks for Allied soldiers and Jewish refugees. Disguises, safe houses, forged baptism certificates, all were part of his toolkit. By the end of the war, O'Flaherty had saved over 6,500 lives. Nuns in convents across Italy turned monasteries into sanctuaries, hiding entire families behind chapel walls, teaching Jewish children Catholic prayers so they could pass undetected. But espionage wasn't only about sheltering fugitives. Vatican diplomats often received reports from missionaries in occupied Europe, troop movements, bombing plans, or atrocities committed against civilians. This intelligence, carefully coded, was passed along to the Allies. In many cases, the Vatican knew of Nazi crimes months before the wider world. The most haunting question historians still ask is this: did the Vatican do enough? Critics argue that Pius XII should have spoken louder, condemned Hitler directly, and rallied Catholics against fascism. Supporters argue that such open defiance would have unleashed brutal retaliation, not only against priests, but against millions of Catholics across occupied Europe. Pius XIII chose whispers over shouts. In sermons, he spoke of innocent victims of racial persecution, never naming Jews outright, but signaling to those who could read between the lines. Vatican radio transmitted veiled condemnations of false idols and inhuman regimes. These messages gave hope to the faithful but angered the Gestapo, who monitored Vatican broadcasts daily. Behind the scenes, the Vatican worked tirelessly to issue false baptism certificates, lobby for prisoner releases, and coordinate underground relief. It was not a war of armies, but of shadows. Let's not forget, Vatican City was not an isolated fortress. It was a tiny enclave inside fascist Italy. German troops marched through Rome in 1943. The Gestapo established headquarters just blocks from St. Peter's Basilica. Spies moved freely, and Mussolini's regime kept a watchful eye on Vatican activities. Every courier risked arrest. Every priest who hid a refugee faced torture. There were whispers that even Vatican officials themselves had been infiltrated. The walls of the Apostolic Palace were not immune to betrayal. And yet, the machine kept working. Cryptographers in the Vatican developed code systems to disguise messages. Some reports were hidden inside prayer books, others tucked into hollow crucifixes. Even the humble confessional booth became a cover for passing intelligence. Among the Vatican's many covert heroes, one name deserves special attention: Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty. Nicknamed the Scarlet Pimpernel of the Vatican, O'Flaherty ran a vast underground network from within Rome. Using his position as a Vatican official, he secured papers, coordinated safe houses, and disguised refugees. His network included diplomats, resistance fighters, even sympathetic Germans. The Nazis knew of him. They painted a white line outside St. Peter's Square, threatening to kill him if he ever stepped beyond it. Yet every day, O'Flaherty found ways to slip information across that line, always one step ahead. His courage saved thousands, and his story later inspired books and films. But O'Flaherty was not unique. He was simply one of many clergy who turned faith into resistance. Perhaps the most painful and debated chapter of Vatican wartime history is its response to the Holocaust. We now know that by 1942, the Vatican was aware of mass deportations and exterminations. Reports had reached Rome from Polish bishops, from missionaries, from German informants horrified by what they had seen. Yet Pope Pius XII never issued a full-throated public condemnation of Hitler's final solution. His defenders argue he feared greater retaliation. His critics argue silence was complicity. What is less debated is the direct aid offered by clergy on the ground. Convents, monasteries, and Vatican buildings themselves became hiding places. Historians estimate that thousands of Jews in Rome survived because the Church opened its doors when no one else would. So was the Vatican silent, or was it secretly loud in action while quiet in words? History still wrestles with that answer. We must also remember that espionage was not only about hiding refugees or passing coded notes. It was also about diplomacy. Pius XII maintained secret channels with German generals who sought to overthrow Hitler. He served as an intermediary between the German resistance and the Allies. Some hoped that the Vatican could broker a peace if Hitler fell. These efforts mostly failed. The conspiracies against Hitler collapsed, and Allied leaders often distrusted Vatican involvement. But the attempt reveals the Vatican's unusual role: a state with no weapons, trying to bend the course of history with only words and trust. When the war ended in 1945, much of the Vatican's secret work remained hidden. Many priests returned to their parishes, never speaking of the refugees they had saved or the intelligence they had passed. O'Flaherty retired quietly. Pius XIII was praised by some, condemned by others. But slowly documents began to emerge. Testimonies of survivors revealed how convent doors had opened in the night, how coded messages had reached Allied intelligence, how quiet priests had defied Nazi soldiers with nothing but faith and courage. The Vatican had not been a silent bystander. It had been a silent player. Today, when we walk through St. Peter's Square, it is easy to see only the grandeur, the basilica, the art, the ceremonies. But behind those walls once operated a network of spies, priests and nuns who risked everything. The Vatican's wartime role is still debated. Some call Pius XII Hitler's Pope for not speaking more boldly. Others call him the Pope of Silence, who saved more lives than history records. But one truth is undeniable. In the bloodiest war humanity has ever known, even the smallest state, armed with nothing but faith and diplomacy, found ways to fight. And perhaps that is the lesson worth remembering: that courage comes in many forms. Not all wars are fought with guns. Some are fought with whispers, with coded prayers, with the quiet turning of a key in a locked convent door. So next time you think of World War II, remember that the story is larger than armies and battles. Inside the Vatican's marble halls, a different kind of war unfolded. A war of secrecy, morality, and defiance against tyranny. And in that hidden war, countless lives were saved.